One ordinary evening trip to the store turned into a 20-year nightmare no one could have imagined. Her family searched for her for 2 decades, but the truth of where she'd been would break anyone's heart. Her name was Svetlana Vlasova. She lived in a peaceful neighborhood just outside Moscow. She was a wife, a mother of 5, and a woman trying to hold her home together with love, patience, and a tired kind of devotion that only mothers truly understand. That evening in 2005 felt like every other evening. The air was cool, the kind that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. The sky was fading into a dim orange-blue mix, and the smell of damp leaves clung to the streets. Inside the house, her children were finishing their homework and playtime. Her husband, Igor, was getting ready to tidy up the kitchen after dinner. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just the rhythm of a normal family night. At some point, they realized they were out of bread and milk. Something small. Something every household runs out of at the worst time. Svetlana sighed, smiled at Igor, and said she'd walk down to the shop nearby. It wasn't far, she'd done it hundreds of times. She slipped her mobile phone into her pocket, picked up her bag, and headed toward the door. Back in 30 minutes, she told him. He nodded without a second thought. No one imagines danger in the simplest parts of life. No one imagines that stepping out for groceries could change everything. And why would they? We all run quick errands. We all tell our loved ones, "I'll be right back." Svetlana closed the door, walked down the small path in front of her home, and disappeared into the evening. The children kept playing. Igor washed the dishes, listening to the familiar sounds of their home, the clinking plates, the soft argument between 2 of the kids about who got the bigger piece of cake, the quiet rustle of notebooks as homework was packed away. Time passed peacefully. And then, it kept passing. 30 minutes stretched to 40. 40 became 50. Igor wiped his hands on a towel, glanced at the clock, and frowned a little. Still, nothing seemed wrong. He assumed she had bumped into a neighbor, or a long line had formed at the shop. These things happened. But then an hour went by. And another. He called her phone. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. In the beginning, it didn't feel like fear. More like mild concern. You know that feeling, when something is slightly off but you try not to overthink it. When you keep telling yourself, she'll walk in any moment. Maybe her phone died. Maybe the line was long. Maybe someone stopped her for a chat. But as the evening slipped into night, that calm reassurance started to crumble. The children asked where their mother was. Igor forced a smile and said, "She'll be home soon." But even his voice didn't sound convincing anymore. He went outside, walked toward the shop, looked around. Everything was ordinary, too ordinary. The same quiet streets, the same gentle wind, the same dim streetlights. No sign of her. No stranger watching from a corner. No dropped belongings. Nothing. He told himself she must have taken a longer route. Maybe she had stopped by someone's house. Maybe she twisted her ankle. Maybe, anything. Any explanation was better than the heavy silence settling in his chest. By midnight, the worry became something darker. By early morning, it became fear. By the next afternoon, it became panic. And just like that, a simple walk to buy bread and milk turned into a mystery, the beginning of 20 long years of not knowing. By the next morning, Igor was running on almost no sleep. Every noise outside made him rush to the window. Every passing car made his heart jump. Every hour that went by felt heavier than the one before it. He tried calling her phone again. Still nothing. No ringing. No vibration. Just silence. He checked the small shop she was supposed to go to, twice. 3 times. He asked the cashier if they had seen a woman around her age, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a small bag. The cashier shook her head. Not last night, not that morning, not at all. That single no hit harder than he expected. The shop was her destination. The road leading there was familiar. She could practically walk that route with her eyes closed. So why hadn't anyone seen her? Igor went home, gathered the children, and tried to stay strong for them. The older ones looked worried. The younger ones didn't fully understand. They thought mommy had simply gone somewhere and would return with a smile and bags of groceries like she always did. He didn't show them how scared he was. But inside, he was unraveling. Still, he refused to believe anything terrible had happened. Not yet. Not when he had no evidence, no clue, no reason. He convinced himself there had to be a logical explanation. People got delayed. Phones died. Accidents happened, small ones, harmless ones. So he waited. And waited. But the hours kept passing, and the house felt emptier with each one. By midday, reality was unavoidable. Igor dialed the police. He explained everything, the errands, the silence, the missing phone, the shop, the unanswered calls, the fact that she had disappeared almost without a trace. The officer on the other end asked the usual questions. Was there a fight before she left? Did she have friends she might have gone to see? Did she ever leave without saying where she was going? Was she under stress? Did she take any personal items with her? Igor answered each question as calmly as he could. No. 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 She took nothing. Then, quietly. She has 5 children. She wouldn't leave them. Not like this. The police agreed to file a report. Soon, officers arrived at the house. They walked through every room, took notes, asked questions, collected details. They searched the area around the neighborhood. They checked security cameras nearby. And yet, nothing pointed to where she went or what happened. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. That night was the first real test of the family's strength. The children cried. They asked for their mother. Igor held them together, comforting them with words he didn't believe himself. He tucked them into bed, then sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the front door. Every creak of the house made him look up. Every passing shadow made him listen harder. He didn't sleep. Not even for a second. He kept imagining her walking through the door, tired, apologizing, holding bread and milk, explaining something simple like, I slipped, or, my phone died, or, I ran into someone and lost track of time. But the hours dragged on, and she didn't return. Over the next few days, the police continued their search. Partners, neighbors, and volunteers joined in. They walked through fields, woods, bus stops, parking lots, and alleys. They printed posters with her picture, smiling, warm, alive, and taped them to poles, fences, and store windows. Igor carried those posters everywhere. He handed them out. He begged people to look closely. He asked if anyone at all, had seen her. Most people shook their heads. Some paused uncertainly, as if trying to remember. One woman thought she might have seen someone who looked like Svetlana, but she wasn't sure. Every vague answer felt like a flicker of hope. Every silence felt like a punch. Meanwhile, the children tried to adjust. They kept asking the same questions. When is Mom coming back? Did she forget something? Did she go to Grandma's house? Is she lost? Igor tried to be gentle. I don't know, sweetheart. But we're looking for her. He said the words again and again until they no longer sounded real. The police checked every nearby store camera. They reviewed hours of footage. They interviewed employees and customers. But not a single frame showed Svetlana entering or passing by any shop. It didn't make sense. She left the house, and vanished somewhere between the door and the store. A distance too small, too familiar, too safe. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when the fear inside Igor finally turned into something colder. Something sharper. Something closer to terror. Because ordinary people don't just disappear in the middle of their own neighborhood, not without something, or someone, stopping them. The days slowly stretched into weeks, and each sunrise felt heavier than the last. In the beginning, everyone expected answers. The police, the volunteers, the neighbors, they all believed the mystery would break open any moment. After all, how could a mother of 5 simply vanish in a matter of minutes? But as time passed, the silence grew louder. There were no witnesses. No suspicious cars. No clear camera footage. No belongings found. Nothing. It was as if the world itself refused to reveal what had happened to her. Inside the Vlasov family home, life took on a strange rhythm. The children tiptoed around the house, still expecting their mother's voice to call out from the kitchen. They would wake up in the morning and glance at her bedroom door, hoping to see it open. The younger ones asked Igor every evening whether she'd be home by bedtime. And Igor started to change too. He stopped sleeping normally. Every distant sound made him sit up. He left the porch light on every night. The kettle rarely left the stove because he began drinking tea endlessly, just to fill the silence. The house wasn't chaotic, it was quiet. Too quiet. And sometimes quietness hurts more than noise. The community offered support at first. Volunteers helped search, neighbors cooked meals, and friends stopped by with words of comfort. But as the days turned into months, those visits became less frequent. Not because people were cruel, but because life moves forward, even when it feels wrong to let it. People went back to work, back to their routines, back to their own problems. Igor watched that slow shift, and each time a volunteer search ended with no results, he felt the weight of loneliness settle deeper into his bones. Still, he refused to give up. He printed new flyers. He contacted the police weekly. He visited nearby towns, asking around. He posted online. He waited for calls that never came. Hope became his only fuel. Fear became his constant shadow. About a year after her disappearance, something changed. Not in the investigation, no, the case hadn't moved at all. It was the paperwork. The police classified the case as cold. Those words stung. Cold. As if her absence had cooled off. As if the urgency had faded. As if she had just slipped into a file cabinet somewhere. Igor couldn't accept that. He became his own investigator. He read articles about missing people. He researched disappearances in nearby regions. He studied maps of the area she walked through. He even joined online forums looking for similar cases. Nothing matched her story. Not a single situation was close to what happened that autumn evening. With 5 children to raise alone, Igor's life changed dramatically. He took on 2 jobs, one during the day and another on evenings, weekends, and sometimes nights. He became both father and mother, protector and comforter, breadwinner and emotional anchor. Some days were okay. Some days were unbearable. He learned how to braid hair. How to soothe nightmares. How to attend school meetings alone. How to stretch finances further than they should ever be stretched. And all while carrying a guilt he never spoke about. The guilt of letting her walk out alone. The guilt of not going with her. The guilt of not finding her. The guilt of telling their children, "We're still looking," year after year. That guilt aged him faster than time ever could. As the children grew older, each one processed their mother's disappearance differently. The oldest became protective, too protective sometimes, as if afraid that anyone else he loved might vanish too. The middle ones carried quiet confusion. They remembered her, but the memories faded around the edges. The youngest eventually asked less about her. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what to ask anymore. Her absence had become a painful part of everyday life, like a wound that never quite healed but no longer bled. Every birthday, every school event, every holiday felt incomplete. There was always an empty chair, a missing hug, a quiet space where a mother should have been. Even as years passed, Igor never stopped searching. He would spend evenings sending emails to journalists, posting updates online, calling old contacts, asking around, handing out faded flyers with a picture of a younger, smiling woman who still felt real to him. But every time he asked, "Have you seen her?" the answer was always the same. No. Life moved forward in small, stubborn steps. But the wound stayed open. 20 years is enough time for children to grow into adults. For a man to gray and wrinkle. For a world to change completely. And yet, all those years, one thing never changed. No one knew what happened to Svetlana. Not until 2025, when the world finally cracked open the truth. 20 years had passed. 20 long years of searches, prayers, posters, interviews, dead ends, and sleepless nights. By 2025, the world had changed. Phones, cities, news, everything looked different. But one thing in Igor's family never changed. They never stopped looking for Svetlana. Especially their eldest daughter, Alina. She grew up with a quiet determination, maybe because she was old enough to remember her mother's smile, her voice, the way she tied her scarf before going out that night long ago. One ordinary morning, Alina was scrolling through the news while drinking tea. It was just another day, until one headline froze her hand mid-air. A dangerous sect liquidated in the northern region of Russia. Curious, she clicked the video. At first, it looked like any other news report: police vans, officers, reporters, and a group of tired, confused people being led out of a building. Women. Men. All with blank faces and altered identities. The reporter said the group called themselves Children of the True Light. Alina watched casually, until the camera panned to the left. Her entire body went cold. There, among the rescued women, stood a familiar face. Older. Thinner. Eyes sunken from years of exhaustion. But unmistakable. Her mother. Mama. The word escaped her lips before she even realized she said it. She leaned closer to the screen, hands trembling. The woman had the same cheekbones. The same small scar near the eyebrow. The same expression she wore when she was deep in thought. Alina's breath caught in her throat. It was her. It had to be her. She grabbed her phone and dialed her father with shaking fingers. "Papa, turn on the news. Now." Igor answered with the voice of a man who had long ago stopped expecting miracles. "What is it, Alina? Is everything all right?" "No," she whispered. "Papa, it's Mama. They found her. She's alive." There was a long silence. A silence so heavy she could almost hear her father stop breathing. "Alina, don't joke about this," he said, voice trembling. "I'm not. Turn on channel 6. Now." She heard the sound of a TV remote through the phone. Then silence again. Then a sharp inhale. And then, her father's voice cracked. "Oh my God. It's her." For the first time in many years, Igor cried. Not quiet tears, full, shaking sobs of a man who had carried 2 decades of guilt, pain, and hope. "Alina. We have to go to them. We have to bring her home." As the news continued, more details emerged. Investigators explained how the sect had operated for years. How they had recruited vulnerable people. How they erased identities, destroyed memories, and cut all ties to the outside world. One recruiter admitted they targeted women who seemed lonely, tired, or emotionally fragile. Svetlana had been chosen on purpose. The night she left for bread and milk, she had crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment. They lured her with a casual, friendly conversation. They manipulated her emotions. They isolated her. And before she even understood what was happening, they cut her off from everything she knew. Her name was changed. Her documents were replaced. Her past was wiped away through years of psychological conditioning. She spent years in a forest camp, hidden, controlled, reshaped into someone else entirely. Hearing this on the news was like reopening an old wound the family had spent 20 years trying to stitch closed. But now, they finally had answers. They finally had a direction. They finally had hope. Igor packed a bag in silence. Alina grabbed the car keys. The other children, all grown now, called in disbelief, crying, shouting, praying. After 20 years of darkness, a door had opened. And on the other side of that door was the woman they had loved and lost. As they drove toward the northern region, every mile felt surreal. Alina looked at her father, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, eyes fixed ahead. "Papa," she whispered, "are you scared?" Igor swallowed hard. "Yes," he said honestly. "I'm scared she won't recognize us. I'm scared of what they did to her. But most of all, I'm scared to hope." Alina reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then we'll hope together." And the car continued down the long road, toward answers, toward healing, toward the moment that would change their lives forever. The drive to the northern region felt endless. Every kilometer carried 20 years of pain, fear, questions, and hope. Igor hardly spoke. His fingers were tight around the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. His eyes fixed on a future he'd stopped believing in. Alina kept glancing at him, worried. "Papa, breathe," she whispered softly. He tried. But how does a man breathe when he's about to face the woman he loved, the woman he lost, the woman he mourned for 20 years? When they finally reached the facility where the rescued sect members were being kept for evaluation, Igor's legs almost gave out when he stepped out of the car. This was it. 20 years of searching. 20 years of fear. 20 years of asking, where are you? And now, she was on the other side of those doors. Alina slipped her arm around her father's. Let's go, she whispered. Together, they walked inside. The rehabilitation center was quiet. White walls, soft lights, muted voices. People were walking through hallways, some confused, others anxious, some just staring at the floor as if they didn't know where they were. Igor stopped at the reception desk. I'm looking for someone, he said, voice trembling. Her name is Svetlana. Svetlana Vlasova. The nurse gently shook her head. Sir, most of them arrived with changed names. Many don't remember their real identities yet. But if you have a picture, we can try to help. Alina quickly took out a worn photograph from her bag. A photo they had reprinted every year, hung on walls, posted online, burned into their memories. The nurse studied it. Her expression softened. I think she's here. Please follow me. They walked down a long hallway. Each step felt heavy. The air seemed thicker. Igor's heartbeat echoed in his ears. He gripped the picture in his hand so tightly it crumpled at the edges. Finally, the nurse stopped at a door. She's inside, she said softly. She's calm today. But please, be gentle. She's still disoriented. She doesn't have all her memories. Igor closed his eyes for a moment. Then he nodded. The nurse opened the door. Inside the room sat a thin, tired woman on a small bed. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her shoulders were hunched. Her hands rested quietly on her lap. She looked up slowly when she heard them enter. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, now looked distant, like they were searching for something she couldn't quite grasp. Igor froze. His breath caught. His world stopped. Svetlana, he whispered, voice breaking. Alina covered her mouth with both hands as tears flooded her eyes. The woman blinked. Her gaze shifted from Igor to Alina, then back to Igor again. There was no recognition. Only confusion. But Igor didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stood there, trembling, staring at the love he had lost and found again. It's me, he whispered. It's Igor. Your husband. I've been looking for you. We never stopped looking. Svetlana frowned slightly, like she was trying to pull a memory from a deep, foggy place. Her lips parted. A faint sound escaped her. Igor? The moment the name left her mouth, even as a question, Igor burst into tears. He walked forward slowly, afraid to scare her, afraid to break the fragile moment. When he reached her, he knelt beside the bed. Svetlana hesitated. Then, very slowly, she reached out her hand. Her fingers brushed his cheek, as if touching a familiar dream. A tear fell from her eye. I know this face, she whispered. Igor pressed her hand to his cheek and sobbed. Alina stepped forward, crying. Mama, it's me. It's Alina. I'm your daughter. Svetlana looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered. A tiny spark. A small, fragile recognition. Alina, she whispered faintly. That was all it took. The three of them fell into a gentle, trembling embrace, soft, careful, filled with 20 years of pain finally finding a place to land. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was real. After 2 decades in darkness, Svetlana was no longer alone. Her family had found her. Reuniting with her family was only the first step. The next steps were harder. Much harder. Much harder. After the emotional reunion, the specialists gently explained that Svetlana couldn't simply go home right away. Her memories were fragile. Her identity was unstable. Her mind had been shaped and reshaped for years inside the sect. She needed time. Therapy. Stability. A safe place to rebuild herself. So she stayed in the center for rehabilitation, this time not as a lost member, but as a survivor slowly learning who she was again. Igor and Alina visited every day. Sometimes they came with old photos. Sometimes they came with her favorite pastries. Sometimes they just came to sit with her in silence. Her memories didn't come back all at once. They arrived like scattered puzzle pieces, small, blurry, unreliable. One day she remembered the smell of freshly washed children's clothes. Another day she remembered a soft laugh that belonged to one of her sons. Another day she remembered standing in her old kitchen with sunlight falling across the table. Tiny moments. Tiny flashes. Tiny sparks of who she used to be. And every time a memory surfaced, Svetlana cried, sometimes from pain, sometimes from relief, sometimes because remembering hurt as much as forgetting. "I feel like my life was taken," she whispered to her therapist one day. Like somebody pressed delete. Her therapist nodded gently. "We can't recover everything at once. But the pieces you do remember, they belong to you. And we'll help you connect them." For Igor, rehabilitation was both hope and heartbreak. He wanted to take her home immediately. He wanted to protect her, care for her, bring back the woman he loved. But he also knew. This was not the same Svetlana who left the house in 2005. She was afraid of loud noises. She flinched when someone walked behind her. She struggled to make simple decisions. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence, confused about what she wanted to say. And the hardest part? Some days, she didn't recognize him at all. She would look at him politely, like he was a kind stranger. And Igor would smile through the pain, pretending it didn't break him. But he kept coming back. Every single day. "Even if she remembers me only for 5 minutes," he told the doctors, "I will be here for those 5 minutes." For her children, the experience was emotional in a different way. They were grown now, adults with careers, families, responsibilities. They had learned to live without a mother. Some of them had only faint memories of her. The youngest barely remembered her at all. Seeing her again was beautiful. And confusing. And painful. Some cried openly. Some didn't know what to say. Some stayed quiet, watching her carefully like they were meeting someone new. They wanted to embrace her, to share stories, to tell her everything she had missed. But they also didn't want to overwhelm her. So they took it slowly. Step by step. Visit by visit. Moment by moment. One afternoon, while looking at an old photo album, Svetlana paused on a picture of herself and Igor from many years ago. She stared at it for a long time. "Was I happy?" she asked softly. Igor swallowed hard. "Yes. You were." She traced her finger over the image, the younger version of herself, smiling brightly. "I don't remember her," she whispered. And that broke Igor in ways he never expected. Because he missed that woman too. Despite the difficulty, there were moments of hope. One day, during a family visit, Svetlana suddenly reached for Igor's hand and held it without thinking. Another day, she called Alina by her name before being reminded. Another day, she said, "I want to go home soon." Each moment felt like a victory. A small bridge forming between who she was and who she was becoming. Rehabilitation continued like this, slow, delicate progress, mixed with setbacks, frustration, and quiet tears. But through it all, Svetlana was no longer alone. Her family stood beside her, ready to walk with her through every step of healing. And even though they knew life would never be the same, they also knew this. She was alive. She was safe. She was theirs again. That was enough. Weeks passed. Therapy continued. And slowly, gently, carefully, the doctors agreed that Svetlana could finally return home for the first time in 20 years. It wasn't a permanent return yet. Just a supervised transition. A chance to reconnect with familiar spaces, familiar faces, familiar pieces of the life she once lived. But for Igor, for the children, and for Svetlana herself, this moment felt bigger than any of them could put into words. Igor drove the same route he had driven hundreds of times over the years. The road he took to work, to school events, to the grocery store, to search for her again and again. But this time, she was sitting beside him. Quiet. Thoughtful. Nervous. She looked out the window, watching the passing scenery like someone stepping into a dream she wasn't sure was real. Igor kept glancing at her gently. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her fingers trembled slightly in her lap. "I don't know what I'll remember," she whispered. "Whatever you remember," he said softly, "we will face it together." When they reached the gate of the old family home, Svetlana stared at it for a long moment. Something in her eyes changed. A small flicker of familiarity. A tiny spark of a life she once knew. "This place," she murmured. "I've seen it before." "You lived here," Igor said. "This was your home." She touched the gate slowly, almost afraid it might disappear. Then they walked inside. The children, now adults, waited quietly in the living room. No cameras. No excitement. No dramatic surprises. Just open arms. And quiet, trembling hope. When Svetlana stepped in, her eyes moved from one face to another. She saw adults, but in her mind, she searched for the children she once kissed goodnight. She placed a hand on her chest, overwhelmed. "You've all grown," she whispered. Her daughters burst into tears. Her sons froze, afraid to crush her with emotion. And Svetlana stood there, holding herself together, trying to accept that 20 years had passed without her. Her children took turns showing her around. "This used to be your room. This is the kitchen where you baked. Here's where you kept your sewing box." Svetlana touched the walls, the chairs, the familiar corners. Each one carrying a memory she couldn't fully access. Sometimes she paused, as if something clicked in her mind. A smell. A shadow. A sound. But the memories were faint. Like echoes coming from a faraway place. Still, every little flicker mattered. When Igor guided her into the kitchen, Svetlana stopped at the doorway. Her breath caught. This feels familiar," she whispered. She took a few slow steps. Her hand brushed the counter. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the spices, the old teapot she used to love. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I used to stand here," she said quietly. "Right here." Igor nodded, holding back tears of his own. "You did. Every morning." She closed her eyes. And for a brief moment, she remembered the warmth of sunlight through the window. The laughter of small children. The smell of soup simmering on the stove. Just a moment. But a precious one. Later that evening, the family sat together at the table. Svetlana looked around, eyes soft but sad. "You all look so different," she whispered. "So grown. So far away." One of her sons reached for her hand. "We're here now, Mama. We didn't forget you." She swallowed hard. "But I missed your entire childhood," she whispered. "I missed everything." The room fell silent. Because it was true. Nothing could bring back those lost years. Nothing could replace the time stolen from her, or from them. But they didn't want to lose the present trying to rewrite the past. "We can start from here," Alina said gently. "We can build new memories. Together." Svetlana looked at her daughter. The little girl she lost. And the woman she gained. And she nodded. When the day ended and it was time for her to return to the rehabilitation center, Svetlana stood at the door of the house. She looked back one last time. Her children. Her husband. Her home. Her life. Familiar. But different. Beautiful. But painful. Full of love. But also full of 20 empty years. She smiled softly. "I will come back," she said. "And next time, maybe I will remember more." Igor stepped forward, eyes filled with quiet hope. "We'll be waiting." And as they drove away, Svetlana leaned her head against the window. Her memories were broken. Her heart was tired. Her past was fragmented. But she was alive. She was safe. She was not lost anymore. She was on the road to becoming herself again. Week later she finally reunited with her family, never to be separated again. The house was quiet the evening Svetlana finally walked through the door again. Not the old house from 20 years ago, of course, that life was gone. This was a new place, a smaller apartment, filled with photos on the walls and toys tucked into corners and memories she didn't recognize. But waiting inside, was her family. Her children, now adults with lives of their own. Her husband, a man aged by worry, responsibility, and 20 years of heartbreak. And yet, when she stepped into the living room, no one cared about the missing years. No one cared about the questions that still didn't have answers. No one cared about the emptiness in her memory. They only cared that she was standing there. A quiet, emotional silence filled the room. Her son was the first to move. He walked up to her slowly, afraid she might disappear again, afraid this moment wasn't real. But when he touched her hand, and she didn't fade away, he broke into tears. He hugged her with 20 years of love he never had the chance to give. Her daughters followed, one by one. Each holding her like someone finally coming home after a lifetime of wandering in darkness. And Svetlana, for the first time in 2 decades, felt warmth. Real warmth. Not the cold obedience of the cult. Not the emptiness of isolation. Not the confusion of broken memories. But warmth that only family can give. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The doctors warned them that memory recovery would be slow. Pieces of her past would come back randomly, a smell, a voice, a color, a place. Some memories would never return at all. But the family accepted that. Over time, Svetlana remembered. The laughter of her children when they were small. The way her husband used to hold her hand when they walked home from the shop. The sound of their old kitchen radio. The smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Small things. Precious things. Pieces of a life stolen, but not completely lost. She met her grandchildren. She learned how to use a smartphone. She took slow walks with her husband, who still carried guilt, but also hope. She sat alone sometimes, grieving the 20 years she would never get back. But she was healing. Surrounded by the people who never stopped looking for her. Never stopped hoping. Never stopped loving her, even when the world told them to give up. And so the story of Svetlana Vlasova didn't end with a dramatic rescue or a perfect recovery. It ended the way real life often does. Quietly. Gently. With a family learning to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. Her children regained their mother. Her husband regained his wife. And Svetlana. She regained herself, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Life didn't go back to what it once was. It couldn't. Too much time had passed, too much had changed. But life did move forward. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.